Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nadeau, thank you very much for talking about our Energy Savings Act, that efficiency. I hope that we'll get adequate consideration and we'll get that bill worked. Perhaps my remarks maybe should have been in an opening statement. But I come from the construction industry. I started in construction in '65, and I had a home building company over 40 years ago. I started that. So I come with some degree of awareness of what we're talking about here. But the concern I've not heard voiced strongly enough, maybe it's not your fault, but I want to hear some direction. How are we going to get affordable housing for middle-class Americans and low-paid people across this country? When we're talking about, when I'm looking for something in the 125 to 175,000 range, how are we going to achieve that in new homes? Or are we going to tell our American citizens they're not entitled to a new home? They have to buy an older home and renovate it. I'm really curious about where we're going as a country when we're dividing our major urban centers against our rural America. And rural America, it cannot afford $300,000 and $400,000 homes when they're on an income that maybe only is $40,000 a year. So I'm really curious. I hear the issues that you're talking about, and I've experienced as a contractor and an engineer and architect. I understand all those aspects, but I want to see from the other perspective, what are we doing for the people to give them homes that they can afford? Yes, sir.
Mr. McKinley, I think perhaps we haven't been as clear when we object to regulation or express concerns about regulation. There's an unstated bias behind that, which is that our goal is to provide, and the apartment industry is clearly the most affordable form of housing that can be built. But every time a regulation is mandated, no matter how meritorious, there's a cost implication that we end up having to pass on. And this trade-off that you've so appropriately pointed out is the one that is a struggle for all of us in our industry. None of us want to see energy consumed unwisely. None of us want to design buildings that are not accessible to everyone. And yet every time a new law or regulation is enacted, whether at the federal level, the local level, or the state level, or all together, it adds to the cost, making it more difficult for our industry to make housing affordable.
Any other responses from some of the others on how we might be able to achieve more affordable housing? So I really don't want to get to a point that we tell middle-class America they're not entitled to a new home. They can't afford one. They have to buy an older home and fix it up. I think everyone in America, I'd love to see that be able to reach out so that they can have a new home. I can remember the first home I built was in affordable housing, $30,125. And people could afford that. Yes, sir.
I would echo Mr. Bizzuto's comments about regulation. It accounts to somewhere between 18 and 20% of the cost of a home. Now, that's not to say that all regulation is bad or that all codes are bad, because there certainly are not. We support things from quality and safety to the energy efficiency, but there's a point of diminishing return on all those components. We think a common sense approach needs to be taken. We think that the bureaucratic regulators, and I say that with all due affection, need to use some common sense when you're adding 10, 15, 20% to a house and it's not a function of soundness or safety, then maybe it's not as necessary as what you might think. You've got 20% in the cost of the land. If there were some leniencies allowed for affordable housing when you're developing a piece of property, and you could do it for half of that cost, you've cut 10% out of the cost of the production of that house. So there are a lot of small components that could go into reducing that $130,000 house to $100,000 if that's what you had the cooperation in generating.
All right, gentleman's time has
Thank you very
expired.
much.
Chair recognizes Mr. Johnson from Ohio.